Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for having me today. I'm excited to talk to you about data analytics for health. I know this is more of a ACI crowd, but there are going to be a lot of overlaps with ACI because my research focus on social media data and consumer perspective or patient perspective. So hopefully you will enjoy this talk and have a lot of questions for me afterwards. So just first, I'm going to introduce myself and my background and start with why data analytics are needed in healthcare. And then I'm going to go over three projects highlighting different aspects to demonstrate the needs. In part one, I'm going to explore different ways to extract potential health signs using big data and data analytics. And second, I'm going to talk about using data to discover different ways or unique ways to nudge people for behavior change. So my name is Alpar. I earned BS and MS in computer science from Virginia Tech, Ph.D. from University of Washington. Then I did a postdoc at Utah. And now, as mentioned, I'm an assistant professor at UNC Charlotte. So my background is in ACI, social computing, data computational science, and health informatics. And my research is about understanding patients and more about their health problems, health concerns, patient experience, and social interactions using data mainly from online environment, such as social media and online communities. And I apply computational methods such as natural language processing and machine learning to figure this out. Now I am focusing on turning this into digital aid-based interventions. So the future of healthcare data can be in many different formats, but by gathering, analyzing all of this data, socioeconomic data, environmental, biomedical, and molecular and genetic information, we can better understand medicine and change the current healthcare process. However, this can be very complicated, and most of the time data are also interconnected. So the truth is all of this data source needs to work together. So, and this can expand into multiple disciplines, and some of the data sources are using multiple disciplines. But today, we are going to focus on consumer health informatics and public health informatics using social media data. And I'm going to demonstrate how we can better understand patients using social media data. So first, I want to talk about a concept called third place. Third place is where people go to have fun and exchange communication. And today, this is happening online. And generally speaking, this is a group of people with common interests, and their main activity is conversation. And like all social groups, it has social structure. The communication is very important because it can have a lot of information, including pure textual data, sentiment within the data, knowledge, patient knowledge, and even different types of conversational cues. So in this talk, we'll look at a number of different communities or third place, and ranging from a popular social media platform to a little bit smaller public online health communities. And we'll focus on text communication regarding health. So I want to start by asking the question, why social media and what we can learn from social media and how that pertains to health. So first of all, many of us use social media from Facebook to YouTube to Reddit. And a study suggests that 21% of us are constantly on social media. And most of us use social media to socially connect and talk with other people on various topics, including their own health. So if we can extract and analyze this conversation, we can learn more about the issue that patients might not willing to share with the doctors, or even apparently known to themselves either. So we know that like-minded individuals or individuals with similar symptoms socialize in online environment. But what is the implication of participating in this online environment? Implication of long-term participation in online health community, especially depression community, is quite interesting. That's because we know from our own experience and from anecdote that having someone to talk to, rely on at times of difficulty is very helpful. But at the same time, negative emotion can spread. So with depression community, there are a lot of members that are here to help you, but at the same time, there's so much negativity in the community. So I started to wonder which has a stronger effect. In non-mental health communities, for example, patients of cancer, arthritis, HIV, and AIDS have shown improvement of depression, anxiety, stress, negative mood, and they were able to cope better. However, we also know from literature that there are a substantial amount of negative emotion exists in depression community. And we know that emotion can spread, and having interaction with other depressed individual can be a risk factor for depression. So now we know both positive and negative emotion exist. The question is, which has a stronger effect in members of depression community? So to answer this question, I narrowed down to two questions. I wanted to find out the effects of long-term participation in online depression community on members' emotional states, and how does that compare to other online health communities. So to study this, I used Reddit because Reddit is a highly popular social media platform, and there are billions and billions data points and millions of people interacting in Reddit. So here is example communication in Reddit depression community. And as you can see, it has both positive and negative emotions. So I highlighted the positive emotion in green and negative in red. And this is a reply to someone else experiencing a difficult situation. So based on literature, I selected 3 communities to compare to depression community to cover various types of social support in online health community. There are mainly 2 social supports that are studied, which is informational support and emotional support. So based on their makeup of the support, I selected happy because it has a lot of positive emotion, diabetes, which suggests to have both emotional and informational support, and IBS because a study suggests it has mostly informational support. So this is a large data set, and depression being the largest data set. So to measure emotion, I use LINQ, Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count, and I selected 10 dimensions based on literature. And Look has been validated and used in many different social studies. So these are the 10 linguistic dimensions and their example terms. And then I apply linear least square regression to look scores against each interaction sequence for each members. I didn't use time because I was more interested in the impact of each interaction rather than time. Then I compare this to null hypothesis, which is a prolonged participation in an online depression community has no impact on emotional states on members. So I'm gonna graph this out in a graph so we can have better communication. So I can have a easier time communicating the results. So basically, if it's on the left-hand side, it means it's worsening. If it's on the right-hand side, it means it's improving. If it's across the zero line, it means it's not significant. So we can see that members in the depression community have improved in 9 out of 10 dimensions. And the last one, which is ascent, shows no change. So basically, even with each interaction, how often members say yes or agree to doesn't really change, but their all other mood indicators were improving. So I should also mention that improvement in death or sadness or negation, any of the negative field, means they're using less words that are associated with death or sadness or negative emotions. So members of depression communities are improving over each interaction. So I want to see whether that's typical and compare against 3 online health communities. So like mentioned before, I selected happy, diabetes, and IBS. And I used the same method to measure the emotional states. And like before, if it's on the left-hand side, it means the other communities is improving more than the compared to depression community. If it's on the right-hand side, it means depression community is improving more. If it goes across the zero, they're about the same. So against the happy or positive emotional support group, members of that community were improving more, except for a few dimensions such as swear words and death. And against diabetes, there were no significant differences, with exception for first person singular and negation and swear words. And for IBS, there were no significant differences in all dimensions. So to summarize, members of the depression community were improving just as much compared to other online health communities. But positive emotion being such a dominant force in the R happy group, they were showing more improvement overall. So some limitation for this study is that they're overlapping membership and clinical diagnosis unverified, and there could be some work correlations, especially because this is a topically focused conversation. So to conclude, long-term participation in online depression communities could be beneficial for members. So I follow up this study with another study just to confirm a little bit more. So we know that now that individuals suffering from mental conditions are also communicating social media. However, less is known about their everyday challenges they might experience when communicating online. So from the previous study, I noticed that many individuals were wrote their first initial post in a manner that's very hard to understand and disorganized. The here I am a new member here posts were often written in a manner that's very that shows anger and depression and confusion. Um, However, I also noticed that many of the replying posts were more in a very calm manner, and they were using very clear language and voice in their writing. So I wanted to verify this observation in this study and how participating in social media could be impacting members' communication overall. So the literature suggests that language impairment is actually one of the most studied symptoms of depression or mental health. So for patients of depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia have shown language impairment, and experts think is due to uh, the frontal lobes functioning, which control both emotion and language. And these are typically measured through semantic processing task and verbal fluency task. Semantic processing task is determining semantic relationship between words, and verbal fluency task is production of words from categories. So previous studies on this topic conducted in a laboratory setting has small sample size and shown somewhat inconsistent results. Based on this, I wanted to find out whether a language impairment can be detected in everyday situation like social media communication, and whether any changes occur as members participate more and more. So again, I used Reddit for this study and selected, based on literature, selected depression, bipolar, and schizophrenia, and compare against happy, lucid, and bodybuilding. So I selected lucid and bodybuilding because I wanted to have online health community with less medical and technical terminology. So again, this is a sizable data set, and the two new communities were actually more than the depression community. So signs of language impairment in everyday situation, I turned to literature and found out that their lexical diversity is less, and in written in a format that has poor sentence structure, organization, and articulation. So all of this were qualified as poor writing. So then I measure quality of writing, measuring same dimensions, lexical diversity, word frequency, and syntactic complexity, and how is easier reading, readability measure, and text cohesion. So all of this could be summed up to two metrics, lexical diversity and readability of text. So to detect the measure language impairment, we are measuring the quality of writing, and we are using readability and lexical diversity to measure that. So just to illustrate that why we're using readability, because readability covers all of the elements that we mentioned previously, word frequency and syntactic complexity. So I measure lexical diversity by calculating the percent of unit words in post, by calculating the percent of unit words in post, and then I use 4 of the widely studied readability index to measure the readability of post. And I took the normalized average in the analysis, but reported all the scores in the manuscript. So here is the result. If you can follow the gray dotted line in each of the scatter plot, you can see a clear difference between the first 3 communities, which is the regular health community versus the 3 mental health communities. The regular health community have clearly more lexical diversity, which is shown in the x-axis, and lower issues with articulating ideas and poor sentence structure, which is shown in the y-axis. And the difference is significant. And to measure the changes of the communication or the language communication impairment, we use linear least square regression and apply pairwise independent sample t-tests with OML procedure to control for multiple tests. To summarize the results, rating members of writing were generally improving as they were participating more and more in the online health communities, online in Reddit generally. Although the difference between regular health communities and mental health communities were mixed, because they were all improving. So there are a few limitations in this study. Again, same as before, they're all from Reddit, and clinical diagnosis is unconfirmed. And internet writing is quite different from just regular writing, so readability metrics may not be the best methods to measure this. So next, I wanted to see, so now that we know long-term participation can be beneficial for members, I want to see if we can actually encourage prolonged participation and how to do that. So now I'm going to talk about how we can actually nudge members of the online health communities. So we know that long-term participation in online health communities, even mental health communities, can be beneficial. So, however, long-term active participation is a known problem. Just to recap, there are many benefits of participating on online communities, but keyword here is participation. You have to actively talk to other people and discuss your symptoms and help other people as well. And few studies also investigated just regular health benefit of participating in online communities. For example, physical quality of life and cognitive functioning were improved for AIDS and HIV patients in 2 different studies. However, despite the benefits, one major challenge of online community is active participation of members. And without their active participation, members receive less benefits. This is a well-documented problem, and according to one study, up to 90% of members are inactive, which includes behaviors like lurking. And also related to this, dropout rate is extremely high in online communities. And according to one study, 68% of newcomers drop out after contributing a single post. So previous studies have looked at this issue, and there are a number of different studies, but one study that were particularly interesting for me is that the last one, because using vocabulary that is common to the support group, they're likely to receive a response. So this was interesting for me because I want to see what common vocabulary means to people. If we flip this a little bit, if new members were able to get a response by using community's common vocabulary, I want to see whether community can do the same and retain the new members by using their vocabulary. So I looked at this issue of using similar vocabulary or homophily of vocabulary and active participation. Homophily is our tendency to associate with similar others, and similarity could be looks, backgrounds, hobbies, or language. And in this case, I use language or choice of words as a form of homophily. And there are two cases where I can examine participation within conversation and long-term participation with the community. So I'm going to go over the influence of vocabulary similarity with these two cases. So in the conversation, you have two cases where original poster re-engages and disengages. And so I'm comparing these two cases with respect to the replies and similar vocabulary they received. And for long-term participation, I want to see how does that initial experience of getting a response that's more in line with your terminology influence the long-term participation. So to examine this, I collected data from WebMD, and I collected these 5 data communities: ADHD, diabetes, heart disease, pain management, and sexual health. They're sizable data, but a lot smaller than the Reddit data set. And to measure the homophily of words between original posts and first replies, I first quantified vocabulary similarity scores, and I did that by calculating the cosine scores in vector space model. Then I used 2 statistical models to answer the research questions. For conversation participation question, I used zero inflated model, which is also known as a 2-part model. And for the long-term participation, I used survival analysis. Just to simply explain how I calculate the cosine similarity scores in vector space model, let's say 2 body of text share many of the same vocabulary, in this case, A, B, and C, and they will result in a high vocabulary similarity scores. And if they have a less number of shared vocabulary, they will result in a low vocabulary similarity scores. And using the cosine similarity, I calculated the vocabulary similarity scores between the original post and their first replies. And I grouped the threads where original poster re-engages and threads where they disengage. But once I quantified their interaction, I noticed that the data had higher number of zeros, which violates many of the assumptions for statistical tests. So I fit the data into zero inflated model or 2-part model and compared the 0 with zeros and rest of the data with the rest of the data. For zeros, I use proportional zero test, and for the rest of the data, I use t-test. For comparing zeros, I compare whether the proportion of zeros are in re-engaging threads and disengaging threads are statistically different. And as you can see in the graph that the proportion is quite different. Disengaging threads have twice as many zeros, proportionally speaking, compared to re-engaging thread. So receiving zero vocabulary similarity scores turn out to be a strong predictor for disengaging behavior. So now for the non-zero data, I used t-tests. And as you can see in the graph, in all five communities, re-engaging thread received higher vocabulary similarity scores than disengaging threads. The difference is statistically significant with the exception of heart disease community. I believe that the difference in heart disease community wasn't significant because the members in the heart disease community have general tendency to disengage from the conversation. The community had a very high rate of disengagement, which was 81%, which is over 20% higher than the average of the other four communities. So using this, I create a prediction model by fitting the data into logistic regression. And as you can see in the graph, the vocabulary similarity score, as the vocabulary similarity score increases, the probability of re-engagement increases as well. And although there could be other factors why members might re-engage and disengage from their conversation in online health communities, using just the vocabulary similarity scores, I was able to predict their future participation with 79% accuracy. So for long-term participation question, I used survival analysis, and I define survival object as the period of time in which members continue to participate in online health communities. So members were divided into three groups: high, medium, low, depending on the similarity scores they received as newcomers of the community. And as you can see in the graph, high group had highest probability to stay with the community, followed by medium and low, and they stay active for at least 300 days. The difference between these three groups are all statistically significant. And this means if members receive higher vocabulary similarity scores as a newcomer, they're likely to stay with the group longer and participate. To better understand this effect of homophily of words and replies, we control for other covariant, such as their total number of posts, total number of first reply provided, received, and original threads they started. And the higher hazard ratio means higher chance of dying when controlling for other variables. So out of the 5 variables that we mentioned, vocabulary similarity scores have the strongest effect on members' survivorship. So members who receive replies using similar vocabulary, or at least one standard deviation higher, similar vocabulary scores had a higher chance to sustain their participation. So few, again, limitation with the study. We don't really know the real world effects of this observation. And we didn't account for synonyms, but that's by design. And strength of the words were not accounted for. So in this part, we looked at how receiving replies that use more similar vocabulary impacted members' participation in 5 different online health communities. And the findings suggest that participation could be influenced by choice of words in their first replies they receive. We also believe that this method could be used to locate posts where inadequate replies to better serve members. So here's we just looked at some of my previous research, and I'm going to just briefly introduce a few of my future uh, current ongoing works and future aims. So currently I'm using social media data to do more public health surveillance and how we can extract more information from it. And now that since most of my work we're focusing on communication, I'm trying to use generative AI to improve public health practices. So just to conclude this talk, I'd like to talk about different aspects of data interaction or people interaction in healthcare. So the obvious one is doctor to patient, but there are also care team, which includes nurses and researchers and scientists. But in my opinion, and this talk illustrate that you have to factor in people's own home environment and their natural social settings to better capture their overall health. And reality is they need to all work together. So I'd like to thank all my team members and everyone who helped me throughout this projects. And yeah, I'd like to take questions now. Thank you.